Press your fingertips against your wrist. Feel that? Smooth skin. Maybe a few barely visible hairs if you look closely in bright light. Soft, exposed, vulnerable. Now imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering your entire body covered in thick, coarse fur, dark hair sprouting from every surface. Your back, your chest, your legs, everywhere except your palms and the soles of your feet, dense enough to keep you warm on a freezing night without blankets, rough enough to deflect thorny branches when you walk through brush. Sounds bizarre, right? Uncomfortable, unnatural, wrong. But here's the twist. That version of you, that furry version, would actually be normal. That will be the default setting for a primate. Because if we could somehow gather every ape species on Earth into one room, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, gibbons, you would be the strange one. The genetic mistake. The weird hairless creature standing in the corner wondering what went wrong with everyone else. Except nothing went wrong with them. Something happened to us. Take a moment and think about this. Over 5,000 species of mammals exist on this planet right now. Bears have fur. Wolves have fur. Mice have fur. Bats have fur. Even mammals living in blazing deserts like camels and fennec foxes keep their coats. The only mammals that abandon fur are truly massive animals living in extreme heat. Think elephants and rhinos, or animals that return to living in water, like whales and dolphins. We are neither massive nor aquatic. We are medium-sized primates who somehow ended up naked, and nobody, not even after more than a century of research, can give you one simple answer about why. Charles Darwin could not figure it out. Think about that for a second. The man who revolutionized our understanding of life on Earth, who explained why giraffes have long necks and why finches have different beak shapes, got stumped by human skin. He threw out an idea about sexual attraction, suggested maybe our ancestors just found bear partners more appealing, but even he knew that explanation was not quite right. Something deeper was happening. Scientists have been arguing about this mystery ever since. Some say we lost our fur because we started running incredible distances in scorching heat and needed better temperature control. Others insist it happened because we spent time wading through rivers and coastlines. A few believe parasites were the real enemy, that getting rid of fur meant getting rid of disease. Then there are theories about social communication, about showing off healthy skin, about brain size and sweating capacity. The fascinating part? They might all be partially correct. Evolution does not usually work through single dramatic moments. It grinds forward through multiple pressures acting simultaneously over incomprehensible stretches of time. Each pressure, each environmental challenge, each small advantage for survival nudges a species in a particular direction. Slowly, gradually, relentlessly. And our ancestors got nudged toward nakedness. This was not a minor change. Losing our fur was not like getting a haircut. It was a fundamental transformation that rewired what it means to be human. It forced us to invent clothing which led to culture and fashion and identity. It changed our sweat glands, which let us outlast nearly any animal in a long-distance chase. It exposed us to sunlight, which meant we had to evolve different skin colours depending on where we lived. It left us vulnerable to cold, which pushed us to control fire. It even changed how we communicate emotions, because you can see someone blush with shame or go pale with fear only if their face is bare. Strip away the fur from an ape and you get something unprecedented. Something that could eventually build cities and write symphonies and leave footprints on the moon. But why did it happen? What environmental pressure was strong enough to override millions of years of mammalian evolution? What changed in our ancestors' lives that made being naked, despite all its obvious dangers, actually beneficial? The answer is hiding in fossils, in genetic sequences, in studies of modern hunter-gatherers, in observations of how other primates live. The clues are scattered across continents and epochs. But if we gather them carefully, if we examine each piece of evidence with patience, a picture starts to form. You're about to discover why you are a naked ape. And that discovery will change how you see yourself, your body, your entire species. Because this is not just a story about hair, it is a story about survival, adaptation, innovation, and the strange path that turned an ordinary African ape into something the world had never seen before. Your bare skin is a message written in evolution, and it is time to read it. We need to rewind, not just a few generations, not even a few thousand years. We're going back 6 million years into the past, before smartphones, before books, before spoken language, before anyone ever deliberately started a fire or shaped a stone into a tool. Back to a world where your ancestors were just another species of ape trying to survive in the forests of Africa, and they were hairy. Completely, undeniably, thoroughly hairy. Picture this. You're standing in an East African woodland. The air is hot and humid. Trees provide scattered shade, and moving through the undergrowth is a creature about 4 feet tall. It walks upright more often than a chimpanzee does, spending more time on the ground, but it still climbs trees with ease. And covering its entire body, except for the palms of its hands and the bottoms of its feet, is a coat of dark, coarse hair. This is not a costume. This is not some temporary winter coat that sheds in summer. This is permanent functional fur, the kind that matters for survival. How do we know they looked like this? 2 types of evidence paint the picture with remarkable clarity. First, genetics. Every human alive today still carries the complete genetic instructions for growing full-body fur. They're sitting right there in your DNA, mostly switched off, but occasionally expressing themselves in ways that remind us what we used to be. Men with exceptionally hairy backs, women with hirsutism, rare cases of hypertrichosis where children are born covered in thick body hair. These are not mutations or errors, they are evolutionary echoes, glimpses of our furred past breaking through into the present. The genes responsible for hair growth are ancient beyond comprehension. We share most of them with mice, with dogs, with every mammal on Earth. The specific versions that regulate human hair growth patterns diverge from our chimpanzee cousins somewhere around 6 to 7 million years ago. And those early versions coded for full coverage. Scientists can prove this by comparing genetic sequences across primate species. Humans stand out immediately. We have all the machinery for thick body hair. We just have extra regulatory sequences, molecular switches, that suppress expression over most of our bodies. It is like owning a perfectly functional vehicle, but keeping the parking brake engaged permanently. All the parts work. They are just being held back by a few additional control mechanisms that evolved relatively recently in evolutionary time. This tells us something crucial. Hair loss in humans was not about losing genes. It was about evolving new switches to turn those genes off in specific locations, while leaving them active in others. The second line of evidence comes from comparative anatomy, from looking at living primates and asking what their bodies reveal about the past. Look at a chimpanzee carefully. Under that dark fur, their skin is pale, almost white. The hair is not decoration. It is protection from solar radiation, insulation against temperature swings, a barrier against insects and parasites. Now look at human skin colour distribution across populations. The darkest pigmentation appears in people whose ancestors lived near the equator for the longest time. This is not coincidence. If our ancestors had kept their fur, they would not have needed dark skin. The hair would have blocked ultraviolet radiation. The fact that populations developed dark skin after losing their hair tells us something important about sequence. Hair loss came first. Pigmentation adaptation came later as a response to sudden exposure. But what did that ancestral fur actually do? Why did every primate species maintain it for millions of years? Start with temperature regulation. Fur is one of the most sophisticated climate control systems nature ever invented. It works in both directions, keeps heat inside when the air is cold, keeps heat outside when the air is hot. Those dense layers of hair trap air close to the skin, creating an insulating barrier that moderates temperature changes. On a cold night in the African forest, when temperatures could drop to 10 degrees Celsius or lower, that fur made the difference between comfortable sleep and life-threatening hypothermia. But it was not just about staying warm. Properly maintained fur actually helps keep you cool in heat. The hair creates a barrier between direct sunlight and skin, preventing solar radiation from heating the body directly. Watch a lion in summer. It does not shed its coat. The fur shades the skin, allowing air circulation underneath while blocking intense heat. Our ancestors' fur worked the same way as long as they stayed in forested environments with plenty of shade and limited their activity during the hottest hours. Then there was physical protection. Primate fur is not soft and fluffy. It is coarse, sometimes wiry, dense enough to deflect thorns, thick enough to prevent many insect bites, substantial enough to cushion minor impacts. When you spend your time moving through vegetation, climbing trees with rough bark, sitting on hard ground, that layer of hair prevents countless small cuts and scrapes that could turn into infections. And in a world before antibiotics, before even basic medicine, infection often meant death. Anything that prevented wounds was strongly favoured by natural selection. Parasites presented another challenge. This seems counterintuitive because we tend to think of fur as harbouring parasites, and it can. But well-maintained primate fur actually provides a first line of defence. The hair creates a physical barrier, making it harder for ticks, mites, and other creatures to reach skin. Modern great apes spend hours every day grooming, picking through each other's fur to remove parasites and debris. This is not just hygiene, it is social. Grooming bonds strengthen group cohesion, establish hierarchies, maintain alliances. For our furry ancestors, that coat of hair was the foundation of their entire social system. And fur provided communication functions. Primate hair is not uniform. It forms patterns, highlights, colour variations that help individuals recognise each other. It can stand up when an animal feels angry or frightened, making them look larger and more threatening. It changes texture and appearance with age, providing visible signals about maturity and health status. Chimpanzees have distinctive facial hair patterns. Gorillas develop silver backs as they mature, a clear signal of status. Our ancestors almost certainly had similar markings, patterns that helped them navigate social hierarchies without constant conflict. So when did we start losing all this functional, socially important protective body hair? The honest answer is we cannot pinpoint an exact date. Hair does not fossilize. You cannot excavate a 3 million year old skeleton and determine whether it was furry or bare. But we can make educated guesses based on indirect evidence, and those guesses point to a timeline that might surprise you. The earliest hominin species, creatures like Sahelanthropus and Orrorin living 6 to 7 million years ago, were almost certainly fully furred. They inhabited forests, moved like other apes, faced identical environmental challenges. No reason existed to lose the hair. Even Australopithecus species, living from about 4 to 2 million years ago, probably retained most of their body hair. They were spending more time on the ground, walking upright more consistently, but they were still relatively small-bodied, still living in mixed woodland and grassland environments where fur remained advantageous. The shift probably began somewhere between 2 and 1.5 million years ago with the emergence of the genus Homo. Early Homo species like Homo habilis and Homo erectus showed significant changes in body structure. They were taller, more linear, with longer legs relative to their torsos. This is a body plan optimized for efficient walking and heat dissipation in open environments. And here is where the story gets interesting. When you commit to a tall linear body plan adapted for hot, open environments, fur starts becoming a liability rather than an asset. The genetic evidence supports this timeline. Studies of genes responsible for skin pigmentation suggest that dark skin evolved somewhere between 1.2 million and 1.8 million years ago. This matters because dark skin only becomes necessary after you lose protective hair. The ultraviolet radiation that pale skin under fur could safely handle becomes dangerous when that fur disappears. By the time Homo heidelbergensis appeared around 700,000 years ago, our ancestors were probably mostly hairless, not completely bare. They almost certainly retained head hair, which protected the brain from overheating and sun damage. They kept eyebrows, which channel sweat away from eyes. They maintained eyelashes, which protect against dust and debris. They likely had some body hair, particularly in areas with scent glands like armpits and groin. But the dense primate standard body hair was gone. Our ancestors had become, by primate standards, bizarrely naked, and this transformation would change absolutely everything. Here is a clue hiding in plain sight. A clue so obvious that most people never notice it. Human skin colour varies dramatically across populations, from the deepest brown in parts of Africa and Melanesia to pale cream in northern Europe and Northeast Asia. This variation tells a story, and that story begins with the loss of our fur. Think about it logically. If our ancestors had kept their thick coat of body hair, skin colour would not matter much. The fur would block most ultraviolet radiation before it ever reached the skin. You could have pale skin under dark fur and survive perfectly well in equatorial Africa. Chimpanzees do exactly that. Under their black hair, their skin is light, almost pinkish. The fur handles sun protection, but the moment that fur disappeared, everything changed. Suddenly, skin was exposed to direct sunlight for the first time in millions of years of primate evolution. And ultraviolet radiation is not harmless. It does two very dangerous things. First, it damages DNA directly. UV rays can cause mutations in skin cells, leading to cancer. Skin cancer might not sound immediately life-threatening, but remember, we are talking about a time before surgery, before medicine, before any kind of treatment. A melanoma could easily become fatal. Even non-lethal skin cancers could weaken individuals, making them less effective at hunting, gathering, surviving. Second, and perhaps more importantly, ultraviolet radiation destroys folate in the bloodstream. Folate is a B vitamin absolutely essential for DNA synthesis and cell division. It is particularly critical during pregnancy for proper fetal development. Low folate levels cause neural tube defects, leading to miscarriages and severe birth defects in babies who do survive. Any early human with insufficient folate would have dramatically reduced reproductive success. Their genetic line would fade quickly, so here is what happened. As our ancestors lost their fur in equatorial Africa, natural selection began, favouring individuals with darker skin, not gradually, not gently, with intense, brutal efficiency. The key gene involved is called MC1R, melanocortin-1 receptor. This gene controls how much melanin, the dark protective pigment your skin cells produce. In our fur-covered ancestors, MC1R did not need to be particularly active. Skin colour under fur was irrelevant for survival. But once the fur vanished, pale skin in Africa became a death sentence. Individuals born with mutations causing darker skin had enormous advantages. Their skin could withstand hours of sun exposure without damage. Their folate levels remained stable. Their babies were born healthy. They survived, reproduced, passed on those dark skin genes. Within probably just a few thousand generations, a blink in evolutionary time, the human populations remaining in Africa had evolved very dark skin. The MC1R gene in African populations shows clear evidence of strong positive selection. The signatures are written right there in the DNA. This was not random genetic drift. This was active, powerful natural selection reshaping human bodies to match a new reality. But here is where the story becomes more complex and more fascinating. Because modern humans do not all have dark skin, populations show tremendous variation, and that variation reveals something important about our history and our migrations. When our ancestors first lost their fur in Africa, they evolved dark skin as an immediate response to UV exposure. This happened early, probably between 1.2 million and 1.8 million years ago based on genetic dating. For hundreds of thousands of years afterward, all humans had dark skin because all humans lived in or near equatorial regions where intense sunlight made dark pigmentation essential. But eventually, some human populations migrated. They moved north into Europe and Asia. They encountered environments with much less intense sunlight, especially in northern latitudes where winters are long and dark, where the sun hangs low in the sky even during summer, and suddenly, dark skin became a disadvantage. You need some UV radiation to hit your skin to produce vitamin D. Without enough vitamin D, you develop rickets, bone deformities, problems with calcium metabolism, difficulty maintaining strong bones. In the low-light conditions of northern Europe, dark skin blocked too much ultraviolet radiation. People could not manufacture sufficient vitamin D. They suffered. They died more frequently. They had fewer healthy children, so populations migrating north evolved lighter skin. The MC1R gene shows different mutations in European populations compared to African ones. Mutations that reduce melanin production. Interestingly, East Asian populations evolved light skin through different genetic changes, mutations in different genes entirely. This is convergent evolution. Multiple populations independently solving the same problem through different genetic routes. It suggests the selection pressure for appropriate skin colour in different environments was incredibly strong. The molecular clock data, estimates based on how quickly mutations accumulate, suggest these skin colour adaptations happen relatively recently. The variants associated with pale skin in Europeans probably emerged within the last 30,000 to 50,000 years. Some researchers think it might have happened even more recently, possibly as late as 10,000 years ago. This means something profound. The loss of body hair happened first, probably between 1 and 2 million years ago. The evolution of dark skin as protection happened shortly afterward. But the diversification of skin colours, the pale skin of northern populations, happened much, much later, within just the last few tens of thousands of years. Your skin colour, whatever it is, tells a story about where your ancestors lived and what challenges they faced. Dark skin speaks of equatorial origins and intense sunlight. Light skin speaks of northern migrations and vitamin D synthesis in dim conditions. Every shade in between reflects different histories, different environments, different evolutionary pressures, but all of it, every variation, traces back to one fundamental change: the loss of our protective fur coat. That single transformation set in motion a cascade of adaptations that continues to shape human bodies today. We became naked apes, and nakedness demanded that our skin itself evolved to handle challenges that fur had managed for millions of years before. The evidence is written on every human body, visible, undeniable, a testament to evolution's power to reshape species in response to changing circumstances. Pinpointing exactly when humans lost their fur is like trying to photograph a sunrise. You cannot identify the precise moment when night becomes day. It happens gradually, in stages, with the transformation becoming obvious only after the fact. But we can identify the chapters in this story. We can trace the timeline backward through fossils, through genetic evidence, through the geography of ancient Africa itself, and what emerges is a picture of gradual change punctuated by critical transitions. Start 6 million years ago. Africa looks different then, more forested, wetter. The climate is relatively stable, and living in these forests are the earliest members of the hominin lineage, species like Sahelanthropus chadensis. These creatures are already walking upright at least some of the time, a trait that distinguishes them from other apes. But in most other ways they resemble chimpanzees, and that almost certainly includes being fully covered in body hair. Why assume they had fur? Because everything about their lifestyle suggests they needed it. They lived in forests, they climbed trees, they faced the same environmental challenges as other apes. Natural selection would have had no reason to strip away their protective coat. Fur worked. It kept them warm at night, cool during the day, protected from insects and scratches. Change requires pressure, and the pressure had not arrived yet. Move forward to 4 million years ago. The genus Australopithecus has emerged. Species like Australopithecus afarensis, the famous Lucy, are spending more time on the ground. They walk upright consistently now, a significant shift from tree-dwelling ancestors. Their bodies are changing, adapting to a more terrestrial lifestyle. But they are still relatively small, standing about 3 to 4 feet tall, and they still inhabit woodland environments, areas with mixture of trees and open ground. Australopithecines probably retained most of their body hair. The climate was shifting, Africa was drying, grasslands were expanding, but these creatures had not yet committed fully to life in open country. They could still retreat to forested patches, they could still find shade. Fur remained useful enough that selection would not have eliminated it. The real transformation begins around 2 million years ago with the appearance of Homo erectus. And this is where everything changes. Homo erectus looked different from earlier hominins in fundamental ways. They were tall, some individuals reaching nearly 6 feet. They had long legs relative to their torso length. They had narrow hips and a body shape that modern humans would immediately recognize as familiar. This was not an ape body anymore. This was a human body. A body built for something specific. Walking, long-distance walking, hour after hour, day after day, walking across open African savanna, under direct sunlight. And here is the crucial detail. A tall, narrow, long-legged body is optimized for heat dissipation. It maximizes surface area relative to volume, allowing heat to escape more efficiently. But this body plan only works if you can actually get that heat out of your body, and thick fur would defeat the entire purpose. It would trap heat close to the skin, negating all the advantages of your elongated build. The genetic evidence aligns perfectly with this timeline. Studies examining genes related to skin pigmentation, specifically the MC1R gene we discussed earlier, suggest that dark skin evolved somewhere between 1.2 million and 1.8 million years ago. This timing is critical. Dark skin only becomes necessary after you lose protective hair. The ultraviolet radiation that pale skin under fur can safely handle becomes dangerous when that fur disappears. So the fact that dark skin was evolving between 1.2 and 1.8 million years ago tells us that hair loss was happening right around the same time, probably beginning just slightly earlier, by 1 million. Years ago, our ancestors were likely mostly naked. Not completely hairless, but close. They had probably retained hair on their heads, thick enough to protect the brain, the body's most heat-sensitive organ, from both overheating and excessive sun exposure. They kept their eyebrows, which serve the crucial function of channeling sweat away from eyes during physical exertion. They maintained their eyelashes, which protect eyes from airborne dust and debris, and they almost certainly kept body hair in specific areas. The armpits and groin, where specialized scent glands produce secretions involved in social and sexual signaling. These patches of hair help disperse those chemical messages, broadcasting information about age, sex, and reproductive status. But everywhere else, the thick, dense primate fur had vanished. Our ancestors walked through the African landscape essentially naked. By the time Homo heidelbergensis appeared around 700,000 years ago, the transition was complete. These were large-brained, sophisticated tool users who controlled fire, built shelters, and hunted large game. And they did all of this with bare skin exposed to the elements. The transformation had taken roughly 1 million years, maybe slightly more, from fully furred apes to mostly naked humans. 1 million years sounds like an eternity, but in evolutionary terms it is remarkably fast. Think about it this way. Chimpanzees and bonobos have been separate species for about 2 million years. In that entire time, neither has lost their fur. Gorillas have been a distinct lineage for even longer, still furry. Orangutans, millions of years of separate evolution, completely covered in hair, but humans, we shed our protective coat in about 1 million years. That kind of speed indicates intense selection pressure. Something about the environment, the lifestyle, the challenges our ancestors faced made hairlessness not just beneficial but essential. The hair loss was not uniform across the body. It happened in stages, with different areas losing coverage at different times and for different reasons. The back probably lost hair first, as bipedal posture meant less surface area exposed to direct overhead sun. The chest and abdomen followed as sweat glands became more important for cooling. The arms and legs gradually shed their covering as the advantages of bare skin for both cooling and tactile sensitivity became apparent. The face deserves special mention. Our faces are extraordinarily bare compared to other primates, and this nakedness serves a crucial function we will explore later. The ability to see subtle facial expressions, to read emotions in the movements of facial muscles, to blush and go pale. All of this requires naked skin. Fur would obscure these signals completely. By the time anatomically modern Homo sapiens appeared around 300,000 years ago, The hair loss was ancient history. We were born into naked bodies. It felt normal because it was all we had ever known. The fact that we were bizarre outliers among mammals, the only primates walking around essentially bare, was not apparent to us. It just was. But the consequences of that nakedness were still unfolding, still shaping how we lived, where we could go, what we needed to survive. The loss of fur had changed us, and those changes were only beginning. So why? Why would natural selection strip away a protective feature that had served primates perfectly well for tens of millions of years? What changed? The most widely accepted answer begins with climate, with geography, with the slow, grinding transformation of the African landscape. Go back 7 million years. Africa is wetter, more forested than it is today. Dense woodlands cover much of the continent. Our ancestors live in these forests, moving through trees, sleeping in branches, finding food among leaves and fruits. It is a good life for a tree-dwelling ape. Comfortable, predictable. But the Earth's climate is never static. Tectonic forces are at work. The East African Rift, a massive geological feature where the continent is slowly tearing itself apart, is creating new mountain ranges. The Ethiopian highlands rise. Mountains in Kenya push upward. These new geological features begin altering weather patterns. Rain, that once fell evenly across East Africa, now gets blocked by mountains. The interior regions become drier. Gradually, relentlessly, over millions of years, the forests shrink, and in their place, grasslands expand. Not the manicured lawns of modern suburbia, wild savanna, vast stretches of open country where tall grasses wave in hot winds, where trees become scattered and sparse, where shade is a precious commodity found only in isolated pockets. Our ancestors faced a choice. They could retreat with the shrinking forests, competing ever more desperately for dwindling resources in crowded woodland patches, or they could adapt. They could learn to survive in this new environment, this open grassland where no tree-dwelling ape had ventured before. Some lineages chose retreat. They stayed in the forests. They became modern chimpanzees and bonobos, still living in the wooded regions of Africa, still covered in protective fur, still avoiding open country whenever possible. But one lineage took the risk. Our lineage. We moved out into the grasslands, and that decision changed everything. The savannah was nothing like the forest. In the trees you could move from one shady spot to another, rarely exposing yourself to direct sunlight for extended periods. You could rest during the hottest parts of the day. You could retreat to cooler areas when necessary. But out on the open grasslands there was nowhere to hide from the sun. If you wanted to find food, you had to walk for miles under blazing heat. If you wanted to locate water sources, you had to cross exposed terrain. If you wanted to survive, you had to function in conditions that would send a forest-dwelling ape running back to the shade. And here is where the problem with fur becomes immediately apparent. Body hair is excellent insulation when you need to stay warm. But when you are physically active in 100-degree Fahrenheit heat, it becomes a death trap. Fur works by trapping a layer of air close to your skin. In cold conditions, this trapped air acts as insulation, preventing body heat from escaping. But in hot conditions, that same trapped air prevents heat from escaping. Your body temperature rises, and keeps rising until you suffer heat stroke and die. Modern chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, deal with this problem by avoiding midday activity. They rest in shade during the hottest hours, only moving around during cooler morning and evening periods. This works fine if you live in a forest where shade is abundant and food sources are relatively concentrated. But our ancestors on the savannah could not afford that luxury, because around the same time they were moving into open country, they were developing something revolutionary, something that would eventually define human evolution: bipedalism, walking upright on two legs. This adaptation gets explained usually in terms of efficiency. Walking on two legs uses less energy than knuckle walking on all fours. It lets you cover more ground with less effort. You can see farther. Over tall grass, you can carry things in your hands while you walk. All true. But bipedalism had another advantage that often gets overlooked. It dramatically reduced sun exposure. When a chimpanzee walks on all fours, its entire back is exposed to direct overhead sunlight. That is a huge surface area absorbing solar radiation, heating the body, creating thermal stress. But when you stand upright, only your head and shoulders get hit by the midday sun. Everything else, your entire torso, gets shielded by your own body. This reduces heat load by approximately 60%. 60%. That is enormous. That is the difference between manageable heat exposure and dangerous overheating. But even with reduced sun exposure from bipedal posture, the savannah remained brutally hot. And this is where hairlessness enters the picture. Because our ancestors needed a better cooling system, and nature had already provided the solution. Sweating. Most mammals sweat, but only in limited ways. Dogs pant. Cats have sweat glands only on their paw pads. Most mammals possess what are called apocrine sweat glands, which produce thick, oily secretions useful for scent communication, but nearly useless for cooling. Humans are different. We are covered in eccrine sweat glands. Millions of them distributed across almost every inch of our body surface. These glands produce thin, watery sweat that evaporates quickly, carrying heat away from skin with remarkable efficiency. It is one of the most effective cooling systems in the entire animal kingdom. But here is the crucial detail. Eccrine sweat glands only work efficiently on bare skin. If you are covered in thick fur, sweat gets trapped in the hair. It sits there, soaking the fur, making you wet and uncomfortable, but doing almost nothing to cool you down. The evaporation happens in the fur layer, not on the skin surface, so the cooling effect is minimal. But on bare skin, sweat evaporates directly from the surface. Airflow carries away the moisture immediately. The cooling effect is dramatic, immediate, powerful. So the hypothesis goes like this. As our ancestors adapted to savanna life and developed bipedalism, natural selection began favouring individuals with less body hair and more eccrine sweat glands. These individuals could remain active during hotter parts of the day. They could walk farther to find food and water. They could function in heat that would incapacitate their furred relatives. Most importantly, they could practice something that would transform human evolution forever. A hunting technique that no other predator on Earth could match. A strategy so effective, so revolutionary, that it would help make humans the dominant species on the planet. Persistence hunting. And that deserves its own explanation. Imagine you are standing on the African savannah 2 million years ago. The sun burns overhead. Heat radiates from the ground in visible waves. Most predators, the lions, the leopards, the wild dogs, are resting in whatever shade they can find. The middle of the day is too hot for hunting. Too hot for almost any activity. But you are not resting. You and your group have spotted a kudu, a large antelope grazing in the distance, and you are about to do something that seems completely insane. You are going to chase it. Not in a sprint, not in a sudden burst of speed. You are going to jog after it, slowly, steadily, for hours, possibly for an entire day. This is persistence hunting. and it might be the most important hunting technique in human evolutionary history. Here is how it works. You start jogging toward the kudu at a steady, maintainable pace. Not fast, just a light jog. The kudu sees you coming and bolts. It is fast, incredibly fast. Within seconds, it is hundreds of yards away, completely out of sight. But you do not stop. You keep jogging. You follow the tracks. You read the signs. And eventually, after maybe 20 or 30 minutes, you catch up again. The kudu sees you, panics, runs away again at full speed, and you just keep jogging. Hour after hour, never sprinting, never stopping, just maintaining that same steady pace. Meanwhile, something critical is happening inside the kudu's body. It is overheating, badly. Antelopes can run incredibly fast, but they cannot cool down while running. They can only dissipate heat by panting, which requires standing still with their mouth open, breathing rapidly. Every time they run from you, their internal temperature spikes. Every time they stop to cool down, you catch up. After 6, 8, maybe 12 hours of this relentless pursuit, the kudu collapses. Its cooling system has failed completely. Heat stroke sets in. Its muscles stop responding properly. It lies on the ground, panting desperately, unable to run anymore, and you walk up and kill it with your spear or club. You have just brought down one of the fastest animals in Africa without ever running faster than a light jog. This sounds like fiction. It sounds impossible, but it is not. Modern persistence hunters in the Kalahari Desert still use this technique. Anthropologists have documented and filmed it. These hunters can run down kudu, one of the fastest antelopes in Africa, in the middle of summer, in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They succeed because of one simple fact. They can sweat. The kudu cannot. Not effectively, anyway. Human beings possess the most sophisticated evaporative cooling system of any large land mammal. We have between 2 million and 4 million eccrine sweat glands distributed across our body surface. During intense physical activity, these glands can produce up to 3 litres of sweat per hour. As that sweat evaporates from our bare skin, it removes enormous amounts of heat, roughly 580 calories of thermal energy per gram of evaporated water. This means a human in pursuit can maintain a steady pace for hours without dangerous overheating. Our core body temperature stays stable, we stay functional, we stay dangerous. The kudu, by contrast, is covered in fur. It can sprint at speeds exceeding 40 miles per hour, but only in short bursts. Its cooling system relies primarily on panting, which requires stopping. It cannot cool down and run simultaneously. Every chase cycle drives its body temperature higher. Eventually, inevitably, it fails. This strategy only works because humans are naked and can sweat efficiently. With fur, we would overheat and collapse long before our prey did. Without fur, we become the most dangerous persistence predators on the planet. The advantages are staggering. Most predators hunt during dawn and dusk, the cooler parts of the day when they can ambush prey without overheating. But humans can hunt at noon during the absolute hottest hours when every other predator is resting. We have the entire middle of the day to ourselves. No competition. Persistence hunting also provides access to prey that would be impossible to catch otherwise. You cannot outrun a kudu in a sprint. You cannot sneak close enough for an ambush on open savanna, but you can absolutely run it into the ground over distance. Your endurance, powered by evaporative cooling on bare skin, defeats its speed. The archaeological evidence supports this scenario. By 2 million years ago, we see early Homo species with body proportions optimized for long-distance running, changed leg structure, modified foot architecture with a proper arch and shortened toes. enlarged gluteal muscles for stabilizing the trunk during running. These are the bodies of endurance runners, built for persistence hunting, and these bodies needed hairlessness to function. The tall, linear build maximizes surface area for heat dissipation. The long legs create an efficient stride for covering ground. The narrow hips and balanced proportions allow for stable, economical running form. But all of these adaptations become worthless if you overheat. The entire package only makes sense if you have an effective cooling system. And that cooling system requires bare skin. There is another consideration. Persistence hunting demands enormous quantities of water. Sweating 3 liters per hour during a long chase means you need constant hydration. This created strong selection pressure for intelligence and social cooperation. You need to know where every water source in your territory is located. You need to plan hunts that remain within reach of water. You need to develop technologies for carrying water, containers made from ostrich eggs or animal bladders. You need to coordinate with your group, sharing knowledge about water locations, helping members who struggle with heat stress. The humans who succeeded at persistence hunting were not just the ones with the best bodies. They were the ones who were smart enough and social enough to manage the constant hydration challenge. But persistence hunting had a cost, a significant cost that forced additional evolutionary changes. Because while hairlessness solved the overheating problem, it created a new one. Without fur, our ancestors were suddenly exposed to something they had never dealt with directly before. Unfiltered, intense, damaging ultraviolet radiation from the sun, and that exposure would demand its own set of adaptations, its own evolutionary response. The Savannah hypothesis explains much of human hairlessness. It connects climate change to habitat change to bipedalism, to cooling demands to hair loss. Each step follows logically from the previous one. The end result, naked, sweating, long-distance running humans, matches exactly what we see in the fossil record and in modern human anatomy. But this is not the entire story. Other forces were at work, other pressures were, shaping our ancestors. And some of those pressures came from threats so small you need a microscope to see them. There is another explanation for human hairlessness, one that is less romantic than running across sunlit savannas, less dramatic than persistence hunting under blazing skies, but possibly more important than any other single factor. Parasites, tiny creatures that see your body as their world, their planet, their food source, and of millions of years mammalian fur provided them with perfect habitat. Picture yourself as a human ancestor 2 million years ago. You are covered in thick body hair, and living in that hair is an entire ecosystem of organisms that consider you home. Lice crawling across your scalp and through your body hair, laying eggs that hatch into more lice. Ticks burrowing into your skin wherever the fur is dense enough to hide them from your grooming fingers. Fleas jumping from person to person whenever your group huddles together for warmth. Mites living in hair follicles, feeding on oils and dead skin cells. This is not just uncomfortable, this is deadly, because parasites do not merely make you itch, they transmit disease. Catastrophic civilization-ending disease. Typhus, spread by body lice, has killed millions throughout human history. Plague, carried by fleas, wiped out 1/3 of Europe's population during the Black Death. Lyme disease delivered by ticks can damage your heart, your nervous system, your joints, leaving you chronically weakened even if you survive. These are just examples. The list of parasite-borne diseases is horrifyingly long. In tropical environments where your ancestors lived, the parasite load on furred mammals is staggering. Modern primates in equatorial Africa can carry dozens of different parasite species simultaneously. each one draining energy, each one potentially transmitting pathogens, each one reducing the host's ability to survive and reproduce effectively. Now imagine you are part of an early human group trying to transition from forest living to open savanna environments. You're spending more time in direct sunlight. You're walking upright through tall grasses where ticks wait on vegetation to drop onto passing animals. You're starting to live in larger social groups, sleeping closer together, which means parasites can spread faster than ever before. And you are developing the cognitive capacity to notice patterns, to observe that some individuals seem healthier than others, that some people are constantly scratching, clearly infested, while others have clearer skin. Natural selection in these situations is brutal and efficient. It does not care about your comfort, it only cares about reproduction. If parasites are reducing your health, making you weak, giving you fever, covering you in infected sores, you're less likely to survive long enough to have children. Even if you do survive, you're less attractive as a potential mate. You look sick, you smell wrong, you cannot contribute effectively to group activities. This is where the parasite hypothesis becomes compelling. Some anthropologists argue that hair loss was not primarily about cooling or swimming. It was about creating an environment where parasites could not thrive. Think about the difference between furred skin and bare skin. Fur provides everything a parasite could want. Darkness, humidity, countless hiding places. For lice, which need to grip hair shafts to survive, fur is essential habitat. For ticks, which burrow deep and feed for days without detection, dense hair is perfect cover. For fleas, which lay eggs in the thick undergrowth and jump between hosts easily, fur is paradise. Bare skin, by contrast, is hostile territory for parasites. No place to hide, no hair shafts to grip. Any tick or louse on bare skin is immediately visible and vulnerable to being picked off. The sun directly hits the skin surface, creating temperatures too high for many parasites to survive. Rain washes away eggs and larvae that would otherwise be protected by fur. The selection pressure would have been intense. Individuals with less body hair would have lower parasite loads. They would be healthier, more energetic, better able to hunt and gather. They would have fewer disease outbreaks. Crucially, they would be more attractive to potential mates because visible health became easier to assess on bare skin. This is sexual selection operating at its most pragmatic level. You're not looking for the most colourful plumage or the most elaborate courtship display. You're looking for clear skin. Smooth, parasite-free skin that signals a healthy immune system and low disease risk. In environments where parasites are a major cause of death and disability, choosing a mate with visible evidence of parasite resistance could mean the difference between your children surviving or dying young. The genetic evidence supports this timeline in fascinating ways. We know humans have 3 types of lice: head lice, which live in scalp hair, body lice, which live in clothing and only visit skin to feed, and pubic lice, which are actually more closely related to gorilla lice than to other human lice. The DNA of these louse species tells us when they diverge from each other, and that provides a timeline for when humans lost body hair and when we invented clothing. Body louse DNA suggests they split from head lice somewhere between 70,000 and 170,000 years ago. That is when body lice evolved to live in clothing rather than body hair, because there was not any body hair left to live in. This means humans had already lost most body hair by this point, and had started wearing clothes regularly enough that lice could adapt to the new habitat. Head lice DNA is much older, suggesting they have been with us for millions of years, continuously living in our scalp hair. The fact that we kept head hair but lost body hair is actually strong evidence for the parasite hypothesis. Head hair could be groomed by other group members. Social grooming, where individuals pick through each other's hair removing parasites, is a major behavior in all primates. It is practical, it is bonding, and it works. But you cannot effectively groom your own back, your own legs, your entire body surface. That fur was harbouring parasites you could not reach. By losing body hair but keeping head hair, early humans created a situation where parasites were confined to a manageable area that could be systematically groomed while eliminating the vast habitat that had existed across the rest of the body. It is an elegant compromise. Keep the benefits of hair, protection from sun on the head, possibly sexual signalling, while eliminating the massive parasite burden of full body fur. The relationship between hair loss and group living intensifies this effect. As human populations began living in larger, more permanent groups, parasite transmission became a more serious problem. When you're a small band of 15 people moving frequently, parasites have limited opportunities to spread. But when you're a group of 50 or 100 people living in the same location for months, sleeping in close proximity, sharing food and tools, parasites can spread explosively. Hairlessness might not have been the only reason we lost our fur, but it was probably a major piece of the puzzle, a constant deadly evolutionary pressure that shaped our bodies in ways we're still living with today. Let us talk about something you are doing right now. Even if you are lying perfectly still in a climate-controlled room, even if you feel completely comfortable and relaxed, your body is producing sweat. Not much, just a tiny, constant amount, enough to keep your skin slightly moist, enough to maintain thermal balance. This is happening because you possess somewhere between 2 million and 4 million microscopic glands whose entire purpose is to manufacture salty water and secrete it onto your skin surface. It might sound unpleasant when described that way, but this system is actually one of the most sophisticated cooling mechanisms evolution ever created, and it only functions because your skin is bare. Every mammal faces the same fundamental challenge. Bodies generate heat, muscles contracting, hearts pumping, brains processing information. All of this produces thermal energy that has to go somewhere. For most mammals, this is manageable. They can pant, they can seek shade, they can reduce activity during hot parts of the day. But for human ancestors spreading across the African savannah during and after the climate changes we discussed, the heat problem became critical. They were not just surviving anymore, they were walking, endlessly walking, tracking game animals, searching for water sources, moving between seasonal food sources. And they were doing it under the African sun in the middle of the day when every other predator had the sense to rest in shade. This created a metabolic crisis. Walking generates about 4 times as much heat as resting. Walking under direct sunlight adds the entire radiant heat load of the sun. Walking in pursuit of game that can run faster than you means maintaining this activity level for hours. Do that in a fur coat and you die. Not might die. Will die. Hypothermia, heat stroke, organ failure. Your brain literally cooks inside your skull before you catch anything worth eating. Evolution faced a choice. Either humans stay, hairy and accept the limitations that come with it. Restricted activity periods, shorter pursuit distances, less ambitious hunting strategies, or humans lose the hair and develop something better. Nature chose better. The human sweating system is genuinely extraordinary. Other mammals have sweat glands, certainly, but they're usually concentrated in specific areas. Paw pads, around the nose, used more for traction or scent marking than for cooling. Humans are radically different. We have eccrine sweat glands distributed across almost every square inch of body surface. Your forehead alone contains about 200 sweat glands per square centimetre. Your back, your chest, your arms, your legs, all covered in these microscopic thermal management factories. And they do not just produce water, they produce a carefully calibrated mixture of water, salt, and other dissolved substances that has been optimized through millions of years of evolution for maximum evaporative cooling efficiency. When this sweat reaches your skin surface and evaporates, it removes heat. Substantial amounts of heat. Every gram of water that evaporates from your skin removes roughly 580 calories of thermal energy. For this system to work optimally, the sweat must reach your skin surface and evaporate into surrounding air, and this is where fur becomes a catastrophic problem. Thick body hair creates a microclimate next to your skin, a layer of trapped air that is warm, humid, and relatively still. Sweat that evaporates in this microclimate does not cool you efficiently because the heat energy is not being carried away effectively. It just sits there, raising humidity in your fur layer until evaporation slows to a crawl. You end up soaking wet and still dangerously overheating. Remove the fur and everything transforms. Sweat reaches bare skin. Airflow across that skin carries away evaporated moisture immediately. The cooling effect is dramatic and immediate. Studies demonstrate that naked humans can maintain comfortable core body temperatures during exercise in conditions that would quickly incapacitate furred mammals of similar size. This was not just convenient. This was transformative, because suddenly our ancestors could engage in activities that were impossible for almost any other predator. They could hunt during midday heat. They could walk extraordinary distances without rest. They could maintain pursuit of prey for hours without overheating. They became endurance specialists in a way no other large predator could match. But this revolution in cooling came with costs. Significant costs that demanded additional evolutionary responses. The same hair loss that enabled this incredible sweating system created new vulnerabilities that our ancestors had to address through further adaptation. First, temperature regulation works both ways. Fur keeps you cool in heat, yes, but it also keeps you warm in cold. Without fur, humans became vulnerable to hypothermia. A cool night that a chimpanzee could sleep through comfortably could kill a naked human. This created pressure for behavioral adaptations. Fire, shelter, eventually clothing. Our ancestors had to become technological innovators just to survive temperature ranges that other primates handled with their natural insulation. Second, bare skin meant direct exposure to ultraviolet radiation. We discussed earlier how this drove the evolution of dark skin in equatorial populations, but it is worth emphasizing again. UV exposure is not trivial. It causes skin cancer, it destroys folate, it creates immediate selection pressure for protective pigmentation. Every human with pale skin in Africa was selecting themselves out of the gene pool rapidly. Dark skin was not optional, it was essential. Third, sweating requires water. Enormous amounts of water. A human engaged in moderate activity in hot environments can lose 2 to 3 litres of water per hour through sweating. That is catastrophic dehydration unless you are constantly replacing lost fluid. This meant human ancestors could not range far from water sources. They needed to know where every waterhole, stream and seasonal spring was located in their territory. They needed to develop water storage technologies. Containers made from ostrich eggs, bladders from animals, anything that could carry precious water during long hunts. They needed to cooperate, to share knowledge about water sources, to help group members struggling with heat stress. The humans who survived were not just the ones with the best sweating systems. They were the ones smart enough and social enough to manage the constant hydration challenge. But here is what makes the sweating revolution truly remarkable. It did not just help humans survive in hot environments, it helped them thrive in ways no other mammal could match. That persistence hunting capability we discussed earlier, it worked anywhere prey animals had to stop and pant. Hopped, savannas obviously, but also temperate grasslands during summer. Even in cooler climates, a human in pursuit could outlast furred animals during warm parts of the day. This gave human ancestors access to resources other predators could not efficiently exploit. Big cats hunted in dawn and dusk ambushes, wild dogs hunted in coordinated sprints, but humans could hunt in the middle of the day when every other predator was resting. They could pursue prey to exhaustion over distances that no sprint predator could match. They could quite literally run the biggest, fastest animals on Earth into the ground through simple application of bare skin and sweat glands. This was the adaptation that let humans become pursuit predators despite being relatively slow and weak. This was what allowed human brains to grow large without overheating. This was what forced human ancestors to develop sophisticated social systems for managing water resources. The thermoregulation revolution transformed what it meant to be human. And it only worked because we were willing to go naked into a world where every other mammal kept its protective coat firmly in place. Your brain is expensive. Remarkably, almost absurdly expensive in metabolic terms. This 3-pound organ sitting inside your skull consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy budget. 20%, despite representing only about 2% of your body weight. Think about that ratio for a moment. Your brain is burning through energy at a rate 10 times higher than the rest of your body, pound for pound, and energy consumption means heat production. Unavoidable, relentless heat production. Your brain generates approximately 15 watts of thermal energy continuously, just from thinking, from remembering, from processing sensory information, from maintaining consciousness. It is like having a small incandescent light bulb burning inside your skull 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, producing heat that has to go somewhere. For most mammals, keeping brain temperature controlled is manageable. They have specialized structures in their nasal passages, complex networks of blood vessels that cool blood before it reaches the brain. It works adequately for brains using modest amounts of energy, for brains that are not particularly large or metabolically demanding. But the human lineage was evolving larger and larger brains. More neurons, more connections, more synaptic activity, more metabolic demand, more heat. At some point, the standard mammalian brain cooling system was going to be insufficient. The brain would overheat, neurons would malfunction, cognitive capacity would decline, natural selection would hit a wall. The sweating revolution solved this problem. With efficient whole body cooling through evaporative sweating on bare skin, humans could maintain stable core temperatures even during intense physical activity. This meant the brain never experienced dangerous temperature spikes that would occur in furred animals during similar exertion. The brain could grow larger, could consume more energy, could generate more heat, because the body's cooling system could handle it. Some researchers think this created a positive feedback loop, an escalating cycle of mutual reinforcement. Better body cooling allowed larger brains. Larger brains enabled more sophisticated hunting techniques and tool use. More sophisticated hunting provided better nutrition, more protein, more calories. Better nutrition supported even larger brains. and the cycle continued, spiraling upward toward the massive brains that characterize modern humans. Brain size in the human lineage increased dramatically over the past 2 million years. Homo habilis, living around 2.4 million years ago, had a brain volume of roughly 600 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus, appearing around 2 million years ago, had expanded to nearly 1,000 cubic centimeters. Homo heidelbergensis, by 700,000 years ago, reached 1,200 cubic centimeters. Modern Homo sapiens average about 1,350 cubic centimeters. That is more than a doubling of brain size in just over 2 million years, extraordinarily rapid for evolutionary timescales, and it correlates almost perfectly with the timeline of hair loss and the development of advanced sweating capacity. Coincidence? Possibly. But the physics argues otherwise. A large, metabolically active brain produces substantial heat. That heat must be dissipated or the brain suffers damage. Efficient whole-body cooling through sweating on bare skin provides a mechanism for dissipating that heat even during physical exertion. Remove that mechanism, keep the fur, and brain expansion becomes constrained by thermal limits. But the brain cooling story has another dimension, one that connects to social behavior and environmental demands, because large brains are not just about raw computational power, they're about flexibility, about learning, about adapting to changing circumstances without waiting millions of years for genetic evolution to provide solutions. Human ancestors with larger brains could learn more complex hunting strategies, could remember locations of seasonal food sources, could communicate more effectively about threats and opportunities, could innovate solutions to novel problems, could teach their offspring skills that took years to master. All of this provided survival advantages, but only if the brain could function reliably during the physically demanding activities that human survival required. Imagine trying to track an animal across miles of savannah while your brain is overheating. Your judgment deteriorates, your memory becomes unreliable, your coordination suffers, you make mistakes. Mistakes in that environment meant death. Either you fail to catch food and starve, or you become food for something else. Effective cooling meant effective cognition even during physical stress, and that was essential for a species relying increasingly on intelligence, rather than physical prowess for survival. There is also the water consideration we touched on earlier. Large brains demand substantial water intake for optimal function. Neurons need proper hydration to maintain electrochemical gradients across cell membranes. Dehydration impacts cognitive performance rapidly and severely. Combined with the water demands of sweating, this meant human ancestors needed reliable access to water and the cognitive capacity to manage that access. They needed to remember where water sources were located, needed to plan movements to keep water within reach, needed to develop technologies for carrying and storing water, needed to cooperate with group members to ensure everyone stayed hydrated. This created selection pressure for social intelligence, for cooperation, for communication skills. The naked ape with the sweating cooling system and the large brain was not just a biological oddity. It was a creature whose survival demanded technological innovation and social cooperation at levels no other primate had achieved. Hair loss enabled brain expansion. Brain expansion enabled cultural complexity. Cultural complexity enabled survival in diverse and challenging environments. Every piece connected to every other piece. Remove one element and the entire structure becomes unstable. Keep the fur and you cannot cool efficiently, cannot hunt during midday, cannot pursue prey to exhaustion, cannot support a large metabolically active brain during physical exertion, cannot develop the cognitive flexibility that would eventually let humans colonize every terrestrial environment on Earth. We lost our fur, our brains grew large, and those two changes, intimately connected through the physics of temperature regulation, set us on a path that would make us fundamentally different from every other species on the planet. But brain size and cooling capacity alone do not explain everything about human hairlessness, because there was another force at work, another kind of selection pressure that had nothing to do with temperature or parasites or running. It had to do with choosing mates, with signals of health and fitness, with the surprisingly powerful role of attraction in shaping evolution. Evolution is not just about survival. It is also about reproduction, about successfully passing your genes to the next generation. And that means being chosen as a mate, being selected by potential partners as someone worth reproducing with. This introduces a different kind of selection pressure, one that operates through choice rather than environmental challenge, sexual selection. And sexual selection can drive evolutionary changes just as powerfully as any predator or climate shift. Consider the situation of early humans after the population bottleneck we've been discussing. Your population is small but expanding. Resources are available. Survival, while challenging, is possible. And for perhaps the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, you actually have options about who you reproduce with. You're not just pairing up with whoever happens to be available. You can be selective. You can choose. And what are you looking for? What signals tell you that a potential mate is healthy, strong, likely to produce successful offspring? In every other primate species, the answer involves fur. A thick, glossy coat indicates good health and proper nutrition. Parasites, disease, stress all show up in the quality of fur. Baboons, chimpanzees, gorillas, they all assess potential mates partly by coat condition. But humans took the opposite path. We made the absence of fur the signal itself. Because here is what makes bare skin remarkable. It is honest, brutally honest. You cannot fake it. You cannot hide anything. Every blemish, every scar, every sign of disease or injury, all of it is visible immediately on naked skin. Fur is forgiving. It covers imperfections. It hides problems. But smooth exposed skin is a billboard advertising your genetic quality to anyone who looks. Think about what visible skin reveals. Parasites, you can see them immediately, or at least see the marks they leave. No wondering whether a potential mate is carrying a load of ticks and lice under their covering. Diseases? Most show up on skin before anywhere else. Rashes, lesions, discoloration, all immediately visible. Nutritional status. Healthy skin has a glow. Malnourished skin looks dull, flaky, aged. Scars tell stories about past injuries and how well they healed. Even age becomes impossible to hide. Skin changes texture and appearance over time in ways that fur would conceal. In a species where every individual matters, where losing even one person to disease or injury could threaten group survival, being able to assess health status at a glance would be incredibly valuable. And what better way to advertise your own health than to have nothing to hide? To display your skin openly, confidently as proof of your vitality. This is sexual selection operating at a fundamental level. If early humans began preferring mates with less body hair because it allowed better health assessment, then individuals born with genes for reduced hairiness would have reproductive advantages. They would have more offspring. Those offspring would inherit the reduced hairiness genes. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the preference and the trait would reinforce each other, driving human body hair toward extinction. But notice what did not disappear. Head hair, facial hair in males, pubic and underarm hair. these patches remained, even flourished, while body hair vanished. Why? Because they serve different signalling purposes. Head hair became one of the most distinctive features of human appearance. It can be styled, displayed, used as a signal of individual identity and group membership. Every human culture ever studied pays attention to hairstyles, uses them to signal age, status, availability, cultural affiliation. Head hair became a canvas for social signalling precisely because the rest of the body was bare. And human head hair is unique among primates. It grows indefinitely. Chimpanzee hair grows to a certain length and stops. Same with gorillas and every other ape. But human hair just keeps going. Some individuals can grow hair down to their waist or beyond if they never cut it. This suggests strong selection for long head hair, probably because it was so useful for signalling. Facial hair in males tells a similar story. In most human populations, males develop thick beards during puberty. This is a testosterone-dependent trait, meaning it honestly signals male hormonal status. Females generally do not develop beards, creating clear visual distinction between sexes. In a species that walks upright and faces each other constantly, this sexual dimorphism becomes an important social signal. Pubic and underarm hair appear during puberty, providing clear signal of sexual maturity. In the small groups where humans lived, being able to tell at a glance who was adult and who was still a child would have been socially important. These hair patches acted like biological flags announcing readiness to reproduce. But the retention of hair in specific areas created something else, something crucial to human social evolution. Contrast. Patches of hair against mostly bare skin drew attention to specific body regions, the face framed by head hair and marked by facial hair in males, the groin highlighted by pubic hair. These became focal points for social and sexual attention, and exposed facial skin allowed for something no other mammal could do to the same degree: nuanced facial expression. Think about trying to read emotions in a chimpanzee or dog. You can do it, but it is difficult. Their faces are covered with fur that obscures fine muscle movements. But human faces, we can detect micro-expressions lasting fractions of a second. We can distinguish dozens of different emotional states just by looking at someone's face. Happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise, contempt, and countless subtle variations and combinations of these basic emotions. This is only possible because our faces are bare. Every tiny movement of muscles around the eyes, mouth, and forehead is visible. We evolved one of the most complex systems of facial communication in the animal kingdom, and it required naked skin to function. The same applies to blushing. This uniquely human trait only works because our facial skin is exposed and relatively translucent. When we experience certain emotions, embarrassment, shame, attraction, blood rushes to the face, causing visible reddening. It is an involuntary signal we cannot fake or suppress, an honest advertisement of our emotional state. No other primate blushes, or if they do, you cannot see it through their fur. But humans broadcast internal states on our faces for everyone to see. This created emotional transparency that would have been valuable in tight-knit groups. You could tell at a glance if someone was lying, uncomfortable, attracted to you, feeling guilty. This made cooperation easier and deception harder. Sexual selection for hairlessness had another consequence, one that would become increasingly important as humans spread across the planet. It exposed our skin to environmental variation, and skin, unlike fur, responds quickly to different selective pressures. When humans were confined to Africa, skin colour variation was probably limited. Dark skin, rich in melanin, protected against intense UV radiation at equatorial latitudes. But as populations moved into Europe and Asia, they encountered very different sunlight conditions. Less intense UV, particularly in northern latitudes where winters are long and dark. Dark skin in these environments became disadvantageous because skin does not just need protection from UV radiation. It needs to synthesize vitamin D, and that requires UV exposure. Too much melanin in low UV environments meant vitamin D deficiency, which causes rickets, weakened bones, reduced reproductive success. So natural selection lightened skin in northern populations, not all at once. Gradually over thousands of generations, by the time modern humans reached Europe around 40,000 years ago, some populations had probably already begun evolving lighter skin tones, and the process accelerated as they moved further north. This created the remarkable diversity of human skin colours we see today. From deepest brown in equatorial populations to palest cream in northern Europeans and Northeast Asians. All of it became possible because we lost our fur and exposed our skin to direct selection. We made ourselves naked because it made us visible. And in the desperate world after environmental changes, when every breeding decision mattered, when every individual was precious, that visibility was worth the cost. Losing fur is not like losing weight or getting a suntan. You cannot simply decide one day that you no longer want hair and have it fall away. Hair growth is encoded in your DNA, written into the molecular instruction manual that builds your body from a single fertilized cell. To go from a furry ape to a mostly naked human required specific genetic changes, mutations that had to happen, spread through populations, and eventually become fixed in the entire species. And scientists have identified some of these mutations. They have found the exact genetic changes that made us naked. Let us start with the basics. Hair growth is controlled by a complex network of genes, but a few key players do most of the heavy lifting. The gene HR, which stands for Hairless, controls transitions between different phases of hair growth. When HR functions normally, it keeps hair follicles cycling through growth and rest phases, producing the thick terminal hairs that cover most mammals, but in humans, something changed. Comparative genomic studies, where scientists align DNA sequences from different species and look for differences, have found several mutations in the human version of HR. These mutations do not eliminate the gene entirely. That would be lethal, causing severe developmental problems. Instead, they modify how the gene functions, reducing its activity in most parts of the body. The result? Hair follicles that produce vellus hairs instead of terminal hairs. The thin, fine, almost invisible hairs that cover most of your body. The evolutionary compromise between being completely bald and being fully furred. But HR is not working alone. Another crucial gene is FGF5, fibroblast growth factor 5. This gene determines how long hair can grow before the follicle enters its resting phase. In mice with broken FGF5 genes, hair just keeps growing and growing, creating bizarre long-haired mutants. In humans, FGF5 works normally in certain areas like your scalp, which is why hair on your head can grow several feet long if you never cut it. But in other areas, the gene has been modified or its expression reduced, limiting hair length to barely visible fuzz. Then there is EDAR, a gene controlling density and thickness of hair follicles. Different versions of this gene create different hair textures across human populations. East Asians, for instance, tend to have a specific variant of EDAR that produces thicker individual hairs but fewer total follicles. This variant arose relatively recently in evolutionary terms, probably within the last 30,000 years, showing that human hairlessness is still evolving, still being refined by natural selection. What fascinates researchers is the timing. When scientists use molecular clock analysis, looking at how many mutations have accumulated and calculating backward to estimate when changes occurred, they get a timeline that matches perfectly with other evidence for human hair loss. The key mutations in HR appear to have become widespread around 1.2 million years ago, give or take a few 100,000 years. In evolutionary terms, that is remarkably precise. This timing aligns with the fossil record suggesting our ancestors were losing their fur, right around when climate was forcing populations into situations where hairlessness would be advantageous. But losing hair created an immediate problem, a deadly serious problem. Without fur, human skin was suddenly exposed to something it had never dealt with before. Direct, intense, unfiltered ultraviolet radiation that could cause sunburn, skin cancer, and destroy folate, a crucial vitamin needed for DNA synthesis and fetal development. The solution came through another set of genetic changes, mutations in genes controlling skin pigmentation. The key gene here is MC1R, melanocortin-1 receptor. This gene determines how much melanin, dark protective pigment, your skin cells produce. In our furry ancestors, MC1R did not need to be particularly active. Fur provided protection from UV radiation, so skin colour under that fur did not matter much. You could have pale skin under dark fur and survive perfectly fine. But once the fur was gone, pale skin in equatorial Africa became a death sentence. Severe sunburn, yes, but more importantly, UV radiation breaks down folate in the bloodstream. Low folate levels cause neural tube defects in developing fetuses, leading to miscarriages and birth defects. Any individual with pale skin mutation would have dramatically lower reproductive success. Their babies would be less likely to survive. So natural selection acted with brutal efficiency. Within probably just a few thousand generations, human populations remaining in Africa had evolved very dark skin. Not just a tan, actual genetic changes making their skin cells produce massive amounts of melanin. The MC1R gene in African populations shows evidence of strong positive selection. Individuals with dark skin variants were significantly more likely to survive and reproduce than those without. The signatures of this selection are written clearly in modern human DNA. But modern human populations show tremendous variation in skin colour, from darkest possible shades in parts of Africa and Melanesia to palest complexions in Northern Europe. This variation tells us something important. The evolution of hairlessness and the evolution of skin colour happened in stages, not all at once. When our ancestors first lost their fur in Africa, they evolved dark skin as immediate protection. But as human populations later migrated out of Africa into Europe and Asia, they encountered environments with much less intense sunlight. Suddenly, dark skin became disadvantageous. You need some UV radiation hitting your skin to produce vitamin D. Without enough vitamin D, you develop rickets, bone deformities, problems with calcium metabolism. In low-light conditions of Northern Europe and Northern Asia, especially during long winters, dark skin blocked too much UV radiation. People could not produce enough vitamin D, so populations migrating north evolved lighter skin. The MC1R gene shows different mutations in European populations compared to African ones. Mutations that reduce melanin production. Interestingly, East Asian populations evolved light skin through different genetic changes. Mutations in different genes entirely. This is convergent evolution. Multiple populations independently solving the same problem through different genetic routes. It suggests selection pressure for appropriate skin colour in different environments was incredibly strong enough to drive rapid evolution in multiple populations simultaneously. The molecular clock data suggests these skin colour adaptations happened fairly recently. The variants associated with pale skin in Europeans probably emerged within the last 30,000 to 50,000 years. Some researchers think it might have happened even more recently, possibly as late as 10,000 years ago, accelerated by adoption of agriculture providing a diet lower in vitamin D than hunting and gathering lifestyle. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The key point is that losing hair required a cascade of genetic changes. First, mutations reducing hair growth, then mutations adjusting skin pigmentation to match local UV radiation levels. And genetic changes did not stop there. Remember how humans retain terminal hair in certain areas? Your scalp, armpits, groin, and for men, facial hair and chest hair. Why? What makes these areas special? The answer lies in gene expression patterns. The genes for hair growth are still present everywhere in your body. Every skin cell has the complete instruction manual, but different genes get turned on and off in different locations, controlled by regulatory sequences acting like molecular switches. In areas where humans retain thick hair, those regulatory switches kept hair growth genes fully active. On your scalp, this probably relates to thermoregulation, protecting your brain from overheating and preventing heat loss in cold conditions. In your armpits and groin, retained hair serves different function. These areas contain specialized sweat glands, apocrine glands, producing thicker odor causing secretions involved in scent signaling. Hair in these regions help disperse those scents, broadcasting chemical signals about age, sex, and reproductive status. The genetic changes making humans mostly hairless apparently left these regions alone, possibly because social signaling functions were important enough that natural selection preserved them. Facial hair in men is particularly interesting because it is controlled by sex hormones, specifically testosterone. The genes are same in men and women, but testosterone activates additional regulatory switches during puberty in males, causing thicker, darker hair growth on face, chest, and other areas. This suggests facial hair evolved as sexually selected trait, possibly a signal of male maturity and dominance. Modern human populations show significant variation in body hair, and that variation is genetically determined. Some populations are relatively hairy, others quite smooth. Mediterranean populations, for instance, tend to have more body hair than East Asian populations. This reflects different selection pressures and different evolutionary histories. What is truly remarkable is how fast all these changes happened. From first mutations in hair growth genes around 1.2 million years ago to diversification of skin colour and body hair patterns in different populations over last 100,000 years. Human hairlessness evolved in what amounts to an evolutionary eye blink. This tells us selection pressures must have been enormous. Individuals with right mutations for their environment had significantly better survival and reproductive success than those without. Natural selection was operating at maximum intensity, rapidly reshaping the human body to meet new challenges. We can see this rapid evolution in our genomes today. When geneticists examine patterns of variation in hair and skin pigmentation genes, they find signatures of recent selection. Long stretches of DNA with very little variation, indicating particular gene variants swept through populations so fast that neighbouring DNA sequences got carried along unchanged. This is the genetic fingerprint of evolution in action. Proof that human hairlessness was not some gradual drift but an active response to intense environmental pressures. Here is what most people fail to realise about losing our fur. It was not just a biological change, it was a catalyst that forced technological and cultural innovation at unprecedented scales. Because once your ancestors shed that protective coat, they became vulnerable in ways no other primate had ever experienced. And vulnerability, it turns out, is one of history's greatest drivers of invention. Think about it practically. A chimpanzee can sleep under a tree when rain falls and wake up uncomfortable but alive. Try that as a naked human in a temperate climate and you face hypothermia by morning. A gorilla can trek through thorny undergrowth without much concern. You, with your exposed skin, would be torn and bleeding within minutes. Other primates handle temperature swings of 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit without difficulty. You need shelter, fire, and clothing just to survive a typical spring day in most of Europe or Asia. So here is the question. If being naked made us so vulnerable, how did we become the most successful large mammal on the planet? How did these hairless, fragile creatures not just survive but dominate every terrestrial ecosystem from the Arctic to the Sahara? The answer is that our nakedness forced us to become inventors, not just tool users. Lots of animals use tools, but systematic, creative, problem-solving inventors who could adapt to any environment through technology and culture, rather than waiting millions of years for biological evolution to do the work. Start with clothing, the most obvious consequence of hairlessness. Lose your fur coat and you need a replacement. The archaeological evidence for early clothing is frustratingly sparse because organic materials like leather and plant fibers do not preserve well in most conditions. But we can date the invention of clothing through a surprising source. Lice. Remember our discussion of parasites? There are 3 types of lice parasitizing humans. Head lice living in scalp hair, pubic lice living in coarser body hair, and body lice living in clothing. Genetic analysis of body lice shows they diverge from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. That is when body lice evolved, as a distinct species, and they could only do that once humans started wearing clothing regularly enough for lice to specialize in that ecological niche. So by around 100,000 years ago, your ancestors were wearing clothes. Not occasionally, not just for special occasions, regularly enough that parasites evolved to exploit this new habitat. This represents a cognitive revolution. Making clothing is not like picking up a stick to probe for termites. You have to imagine the finished product before you start. You have to understand abstract concepts like cutting, joining, fitting. You need to develop entirely new technologies, scraping hides, processing plant fibers, creating needles and thread, inventing ways to tie or stitch materials together. More importantly, you have to teach these skills to your children. Clothing manufacture became one of the first truly complex technologies requiring generational knowledge transfer. A young chimpanzee can learn to use a termite stick by watching mother a few times. Learning to make a fitted garment from animal hides requires years of instruction and practice. This created selection pressure for teaching ability and learning capacity. Individuals better at acquiring and transmitting complex skills had survival advantages. Their children were more likely to survive cold nights. Their groups were more likely to thrive in challenging environments. Over thousands of generations, this refined human cognitive abilities in ways that set us apart from every other species. But clothing was just beginning. Because here is the reality of being a naked ape in a world that regularly drops below freezing. Clothing helps, certainly, but it is not enough. You need fire, not just for cooking, though that matters, not just for protection, though that helps. You need fire to literally stay alive through the night in most of the world's temperate and cold zones. Early humans had been using fire opportunistically for perhaps 1 million years. Lightning strikes, natural wildfires. These could be exploited for warmth and cooking. But hairlessness created pressure to control fire systematically, to make it on demand, to maintain it through wet conditions, to transport it from place to place, to teach others how to manage it safely. Archaeological sites from around 400,000 years ago show evidence of systematic fire use. Hearths maintained over long periods. Careful placement of fires inside caves and rock shelters. Strategic use of different woods for different purposes. This represents another technological leap. Fire management requires planning, knowledge of materials, understanding of combustion and airflow. It is chemistry and engineering without formal concepts. More than that, fire created new social dynamics. A fire needs tending. Someone has to gather fuel, maintain flames, make sure it does not spread dangerously. This creates opportunities for labour specialisation. While some group members hunt or gather, others maintain fire. While some sleep, others keep watch and feed flames. Fire also changed when and where humans could socialise. Before controlled fire, your ancestors would have been like other primates, active during daylight, resting at night in protected locations. Fire extended the day. It created focal point for evening gatherings. Anthropologists believe this is when storytelling evolved. When elder knowledge began being systematically transmitted through narratives told around fire, the technology we needed because we lost our fur became the centerpiece of human cultural evolution. And then there is shelter, third crucial technology. Furred animals can sleep rough most nights without serious consequences. Naked humans cannot. We need protection from elements other primates simply endure. This forced our ancestors to become builders and architects. Early shelters were probably simple. Caves and rock overhangs, natural protection requiring minimal modification, but caves are not everywhere, and they are often occupied by other large predators not interested in sharing. So humans learned to build. The earliest constructed shelters date back at least 400,000 years. Circles of stones probably anchoring wooden frames covered with hides or vegetation. These are not impressive by modern standards, but they represent something revolutionary. The ability to create artificial environments, to modify surroundings rather than just adapting to them. This skill set would eventually let humans colonize literally every land environment on Earth. The Arctic, where winter temperatures drop to -40 degrees and darkness lasts for months. The tropical rainforests where constant moisture and biting insects make life miserable for any large mammal. The deserts where daytime heat can kill in hours and nights get cold enough to freeze. No other large mammal lives in all these environments. Polar bears stay in the Arctic. Jaguars stick to tropics. Camels avoid poles. But humans, fragile, hairless, vulnerable humans, we are everywhere. Not because we biologically adapted to each environment. That would take millions of years. But because we culturally adapted. We invented parkas and igloos for the Arctic, breathable clothing and raised dwellings for tropics, desert robes and water storage for arid regions. Our nakedness, which should have been fatal weakness, became our greatest strength, because it forced us to develop cognitive and cultural tools to adapt to anything. We lost our fur and had to invent clothing. That made us inventors. We needed fire and had to control it. That made us engineers. We required shelter and had to build it. That made us architects. Every vulnerability that came from our nakedness forced us to develop new capabilities, new technologies, new social systems, new ways of understanding and manipulating the world around us. And that is the real consequence of hairlessness. It did not just change what we looked like, it changed what we were capable of becoming. It transformed us from just another African ape into something unprecedented. A species that could adapt to any environment not through evolution, but through innovation. A species that could colonize an entire planet not by developing specialized biology for each habitat, but by developing cognitive tools to create specialized solutions for each challenge. So here we are at the end of our journey through millions of years of evolutionary history. And what have we discovered? That there was no single moment when humans lost their fur, no dramatic mutation, no sudden evolutionary leap, just layer upon layer of evolutionary pressures, each one pushing our ancestors toward increasingly bare skin, the Savannah hypothesis, running under brutal African sun, needing to dump heat faster than any other mammal, the aquatic influences, maybe spending enough time in water that fur became liability rather than asset, the parasite problem, every louse, every tick, every disease-carrying insect providing natural selection, another reason to favour hairless individuals, the cooling revolution, sweating efficiently only on bare skin, the brain expansion, large metabolically active brains needing effective whole-body cooling, sexual selection, smooth skin becoming signal of health, youth, attractiveness. None of these explanations alone is sufficient, but together they paint a picture of evolutionary forces converging on the same solution. Hair had to go, and when it did, everything changed. Without hair, we needed clothing. Development of clothing required planning, tool-making, abstract reasoning. It pushed our ancestors to think ahead, to prepare for future needs. Without fur's protection, we needed shelter. Not just temporary sleeping spots, but constructed spaces requiring cooperation and innovation to build. Without hair to provide insulation, we needed fire. Mastering fire meant mastering one of nature's most dangerous forces. It meant developing cognitive capacity to maintain and control something that could easily kill you. The thermoregulation problem forced us to become the planet's best endurance athletes. That shaped our entire body plan. Long legs, narrow hips, specialized foot architecture. The need to cool our overheating brains during persistence hunts drove selection for more efficient neural structures, bigger brains, yes, but also better organized, more energy efficient, and the social aspects of hairlessness, the ability to read emotions on bare faces, to signal through blushing and complexion changes. That laid groundwork for sophisticated social systems that would eventually let us build civilizations. We are naked apes, and that nakedness connects to language, tool use, art, culture, everything that separates us from our closest primate relatives. All of it traces back, at least in part, to those first ancestors who started losing their fur under the African sun millions of years ago. The ones who discovered that bare skin could be advantage if you were smart enough and social enough to work around its vulnerabilities. Your ancestors were those individuals, the ones who survived despite being naked and vulnerable, who turned potential weakness into humanity's greatest strength, who learned to dominate every environment on Earth despite having none of the natural armor, fur, claws, or fangs that other apex predators relied on. They did it with intelligence, with cooperation, with the evolutionary adaptations that came from being furless primates trying to survive in dangerous world. Every time you sweat through a workout, you are using the cooling system that hair loss made possible. Every time you bundle up against cold, you are compensating for insulation your ancestors lost. Every time you read emotion on someone's face, You are using communication advantages that bare skin provided. We are descendants of the naked apes, and that nakedness made us human, made us inventors and innovators, made us the species that could leave Africa and colonize 6 continents, that could survive in every climate from frozen tundra to burning desert, that could eventually build cities and write symphonies and leave footprints on the moon, all because we lost our fur, all because natural selection stripped away a protective feature that had served mammals well for hundreds of millions of years, and in losing it, we gained something far more valuable. We gained the capacity to adapt through culture rather than biology, to innovate rather than evolve, to solve problems through intelligence rather than instinct. Your bare skin is not a weakness. It is a testament to the power of evolution to reshape species in response to environmental pressures. It is evidence of the extraordinary path that transformed an ordinary African ape into something the world had never seen before. We lost our fur and gained the world. We became naked and became human. And that transformation, that fundamental change in what it meant to be a primate, set us on a trajectory that would eventually make us the most successful large mammal in Earth's history. So the next time you look at your arm, at that smooth, exposed skin, remember what it represents. Millions of years of evolution, countless individuals who survived despite vulnerability, endless innovations that turned weakness into strength, cultural and technological revolutions that began because we needed to compensate for missing fur. You are a naked ape. And that nakedness is written into every aspect of your existence, into how you move and think and communicate and survive. It shaped your ancestors. It shapes you. It will shape whatever comes after us. The story of human hairlessness is not just about biology. It is about adaptation, innovation, and the surprising ways that vulnerability can drive greatness. It is about how a simple change, the loss of protective fur, cascaded through every aspect of a species until that species became something entirely new. We are human because we are naked, and we are naked because countless evolutionary pressures, working over millions of years, made it so. The mystery of our bare skin is solved not through a single answer, but through understanding how multiple forces shaped us simultaneously. How climate and parasites and cooling and mate choice all pushed in the same direction. How losing our fur forced us to become technological and cultural innovators. How vulnerability became our strength. That is the naked truth about human evolution. And it is written on your skin, visible to anyone who knows how to read it,